Welcome everyone to another Warcry, I would say unboxing, but it's not much of a box, is it? So Warcry bands cards, I guess. So it's the cards that you can use for your Warcry team if you already have the models. So rather than buying the box, which are brilliant deals, you've got the cards in the box and you've got lovely models. If you already have the models previously, like I said before, if you've seen any of the other Warcry videos we've done on these cards, it's so cheap to pick up a pack of these cards. It's about £5 roughly, and if you already have the models, you already have everything you need to play Warcry. As long as you have, obviously, someone that has the main rule book, because you might want to, touch up on some rules, and the tokens are great as well. It'd be nice to have the tokens, things like that. But you can use the recommended size of table. You can use any scenery you want. It's just down to the cards in Warcry, because that's the beauty of Warcry. It's different every time. There's billions of different combinations, possibly not that many, but there's a lot of different combinations from different layout, different missions, and different twists. So it's very much like if you're familiar with 40k universe, if you play the open war cards. So the different types of missions, the twists, and the deployments. So that's the beauty of Warcry. Each game takes about an hour, and I find it never is taken seriously. It's just a bit of fun. You can rip through several games in an evening, and it's just a great game. It's just an excuse to bust out those models on the table for a quick skirmish. But if you're like me, you generally forget about the mission and you just want to murder all the models on the table. Then you probably want to head towards, probably want to lean a little bit more towards Khorne. So here we go. Here is the Blades of Khorne Bloodbound. So it's the mortal side of things from Khorne, so not your Bloodletters or your Skull Crushers, anything like that. So it's the mortals. So if you had the AOS box, the very first Get Started box with AOS, very first core box with AOS when you had the Sigmar and the Mortal Bloodbound, Mortal Warriors of Khorne, you already have the models you need to play this. So I'll carefully open this packet and show you the contents. Alright, so get rid of that nice and shiny crinkly stuff. So, in each, if you haven't checked out our previous videos, Warband, you have loads of copies of these cards, all in a different language. Now sadly, I am learning to speak Spanish, but I'm not very fluent with any other language, so I'm going to have to sadly get rid of those. So it shows you what models you can use. So, the Blood Warriors were in the box I mentioned previously, and so were the Blood Reavers and a Giraffe. Those models were not. And I don't actually own any of those yet, although I should do, because I've gotten back into AS a little bit recently, and those models are just epic. And they look cool as well, obviously. So each Warbound is very much like this. It has its own abilities. So if you have any doubles, triples, or quads, and you have those symbols on your cards, you can do these abilities. So I'm trying to get to a place where it's not so massively reflective and shiny, but we'll give it a go, shall we? So, what do we have here? We have, let's just pick one at random. Lord of Skulls, sounds about right. It's a triple. It's for your leader only. And a fighter can use this ability only if an enemy fighter has been taken down by an attack made by this activation. Until the end of the battle round, add 1 to the attack characteristics of actions that have a range 3 or less made by visible friendly fighters while they're in 6 of this fighter. So that's why it's on a leader. It inspires the rest of your troops to murder some more as well. It's pretty nice. Of course, you could always use the main abilities card that you get in the box. So that's the universal one that everybody can use. So a double that I like to use on that card is extra attack in combat, which is always brilliant. But yeah, these are pretty good as well. Nothing I would say that is massively broken. So even if you had quad, 4 dice the same when you first roll up in your turn. Doesn't mean it's unbelievably broken. It is quite hard to get 4 dice the same, but here it goes. This fighter makes a bonus move action, then they can make a bonus attack action. In addition, until the end of the fighter's activation, add half the value of this ability. So when you have your quad dice, let's say you had 6 on those, so 4 6s, it means half the value, that's 3, rounding up to the strength characteristic of the attacks made by this fighter that has a ranged attack characteristic of 3 or less. So basically it means you can use 4 dice to burn this ability. If you have that symbol, you can make a bonus move action, then you can make a bonus attack action, and whatever number is on that quad, you half that, and that gives a bonus to strength characteristic. So if you don't think a model can get into combat, they've moved, then they do this, they can move again and smack. So that's pretty handy, it's pretty cool. Like I said, it's not massively game breaking. I know some of the chain rasps and things like that, they can do effectively mortal wounds, I guess you call it. Like, you just got to roll for the wounds, automatically does damage. With this, you have to still obviously attack. But you do have, let's for example say +3 to strength characteristic, which is nice. It's good, it's solid, it's very corny. They don't believe in magic and things like that. They just believe in full-on bloodshed. So, you know, they do just like to smack stuff. There is no range, really. So you might have the occasional chain whipping around with a hammer on the end of it or something, but other than that, there's no magic, there's no real range attacks. These guys are pretty simple. Okay, so, Blood Reaver. So you notice it's movement 5, 10 wounds, it's pretty cheap, toughness 3. He does have a strength of 4. You know, he's got 1 range, 3 attacks. So if you've never seen this profile before, this is where I'm getting the numbers from. So that's the movement characteristic. If you've never played Warcry, let's break it down. Movement characteristic, how many wounds it's got, that's how tough he is, and that's how much he costs. So for one model, 65 points. Most games people are playing like 1,000-point games, or as near as you can. That's the weapon he's using. That's the range of the weapon, so range 1. He has 3 attacks. That's the number of dice you need to roll. That's his strength. So you roll 3 dice, you ask your opponent what their toughness is, and you use your strength against their toughness. So in this case, you'd be wounding on 3s. And that's its normal damage. So any of those that go through, that's his normal damage. Any 6s that go through, there's 3 damage. So, very, very cheap. That's your core troops. So this is 65 points as well. Exactly the same. Points-wise, he has 1 less strength because he's using 2 small-handed weapons, but he has 1 more attack because obviously he has a tiny little shiv that he's going to try to get you with as well. So put those 2 cards to one side. This is the Giraffe. This is a bit of a monster, so I'm going to imagine this thing is going to be absolutely brutal. I do have 2 of these myself, and I'm thinking about painting them up. I painted 1 up, but it was when the box first came out. And I'd like to think my painting skills have improved since then. So this is the Giraffe. This guy is an absolute monster, literally, with a tiny little head. Hey ho. So he's movement 4. He's a bit of a beast, so he's going to be a bit slow. 35 wounds, which is insanely good. Surprisingly, only toughness 4. But I suppose if it's too high a toughness, then, you know, it would be a bit ridiculous for 35 wounds. So he's going to use his claws. There's only range 1. And he has 3 attacks, strength 5. But each attack that goes through is either 4 damage, or if he crits and gets some 6s, it's then 8 damage. Which is insane. So this guy is a tank and a half. Very, very slow. Speed 4. But remember, it's a smaller map in Warcry, so you haven't got to worry too much about running to the other side of the table. But certain missions, you will pull a card and it will just say, get X number of models in the enemy's deployment zone, end of the game. That's your objective, or other side of the table, or something like that, or get to the center of the table. So this guy is going to be a bit chunky, a bit slow. But now he hits hard. Only 3 dice. But strength 5, so if you're wounding things like toughness 4 or 3, you'd be wounding on 3s. So you wouldn't want to go up against heavily armoured things. But if he's going up against things that has lots of health, fairly low toughness, then he's going to boss it. He's going to boss it. So these guys, like I said, they're not in the main box. So the Mongers have the chain hammers, and the Skull Reapers have the big spiky blades. So this guy is a Monger, Wrath Monger. So being Khorne, obviously, it's going to have words like Wrath, Skull, Blood, you know. That's just the Khorne way. So this guy is a leader, because it's got that symbol there. It's 210 points. So slightly cheaper than the Giraffe. It's got 5 wounds left. Other than that, that profile is pretty much the same. He has range 2 because his weapons are on chains, as you do. 6 attacks, so twice as many as the Giraffe, but strength 4 rather than 5. So he does 2 damage at a time, or if he crits, 4. It's pretty good. It's pretty good, and he is a leader, so he can do some pretty nifty abilities. So regular, let's say regular, still a Wrathmonger. He's still pretty insane. 25 wounds, 170 points. So very much like the previous guy you just seen, but it does 1 damage a time rather than 2 damage a time and 1 less attack. But he's still pretty much a beast. So he's 5 points in health down, but it's 170 compared to 210. So 1 less attack, 1 less damage, and 5 less. So it's quite a difference, really, in points. This guy, I love the poses. You know, he's had his arm ripped off and he's just replaced it with some kind of weird claw. Skull Reapers, obviously, are insane. If you didn't know that already. You know, totems of skulls on the back of them. Such lovely models, I really need to pick some up. But yeah, 195 points. He is a leader as well. Of course he's a leader with an arm like that. So these guys don't have the 2-inch range, they have the 1-inch range because they don't have the weapons on the end of a flail or a chain. Fairly standard for the damage and things like that. So for a leader, 2 damage and 4 if it's critical, which is fairly standard for a leader. This is the regular variant of these guys, so 165 points. I do think toughness 4 is like your average semi-elite trooper. If you've got your minion-y kind of like Blood Reavers or Chaos Marauders, they're normally like toughness 3. You know, so 4 is slightly better. I mean, Chaos Warriors with big shields are toughness 5, but they're carrying big flipping shields, aren't they? So these guys don't really care about defense too much. Half the bodies are normally covered in plate, and the rest of them are just like topless, like to flex their pecs. So 2 damage and 4 of it's critical, so pretty good, pretty good. I don't think any of these guys are like game breaking. I was looking at, like I said, some of the chain rasps and things like that. You know, Fly is pretty good in Warcry. You know, gets you on the terrain that you need to get to, and they're not slow either. Whereas Toughness 4, you need to be on the terrain to smack somebody if they're on it, or at the foot of the terrain. You know, not being able to fly is a bit of a big deal. And they've got no range, not really. Range 2 on the chains. Yeah. So, yeah, you'll find you probably get shot a little bit by anyone with any range, like Stormcast. And obviously you don't have the speed to get up on top of buildings very often, but hey ho. So this guy obviously has a shield. Still makes him toughness 4. And he is a leader, so he can do the leader actions as well. So if you notice, certain symbols like that there is a Gore Fist. It's classed as a shield, hence the shield symbol there. So only these guys can perform this. So pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter, roll a dice, on 3 to 4, allocate 1 damage point to that fighter. 5 to 6, allocate number of points basically to this double. So if it's a 6, it does 6 points of damage, which is great. But remember, on a 1 and 2, it doesn't do anything. So if you're thinking about, oh man, I've just done a really good attack, but I've left somebody on 1 wound, it's worth doing that. Pick off 1 wound. 5 to 6, if you have to rely on that to do some serious damage, you're pretty desperate. But it's a fairly good ability because their shield has a spike on the end of it. That's the whole thing. They get to smack back. So it still has some nods of AOS to it in the rules, but not full blown. So they don't generally get like the auto wounds, like mortal wounds, things like that. There is no disgusting resilient, for example, on Death Guard models. Sorry, that was the 40k in me. I meant like Poxwalkers and things like that. So anything nurgly, slap the 40k out of me, please. So yeah, fairly standard. I mean, he is a leader. 2 damage, 4 damages if it's a crit. That's fairly leader-esque. And 185 points, not massively expensive for a leader. This guy, I've always liked the model. I just think the model looks cool. So less attacks because it's a 2-handed weapon. But on that crit, he does 5 damage. So you're heavily relying on the crit if you really want to do some heavy murdering. But I just think the model looks cool. And that's basically why I picked up these cards, because A, I already have the models, and the models just look wicked. I've always liked the Khorne models. And because, as you can tell, I'm a 40k player, I really hope the Berserkers get a bit of a facelift soon. Right, this guy. So, 115 points is slightly less than the previous dude. But that, it does show. Slightly less. The critical isn't as good. And obviously the strength isn't as good because he's got 2 weapons, like we've seen previously. And obviously with 2 weapons, you generally get 1 additional attack. So do you want to go for lots of attacks? Or do you want to go for a few heavy attacks? The heavier hitting guys obviously are more expensive, but you're relying on the dice. So all of these guys are speed 4. Once again, he's got a Gorefish shield. Pretty uniform because he's got 1 weapon, 3 attacks. Crit does 4, so it's fairly standard. So you kind of get the impression here. Leader for the Blood Reavers. So very, very cheap because it's a Blood Reaver. Toughness 3, not massive. Does have lots of attacks, 5 attacks. Strength 3, it's not really going to munch through a lot. And occasionally he'll get the crit, dealing 4 damage. So really, really cheap leader. If you want to have a cheap leader and a few solid heavies, this is probably a pick. Other than that, you probably go for a leader that packs a bit more of a punch. But like I said, you never know what the mission's going to be in Warcry. Probably shouldn't lean towards killing too often because sometimes you just have to get to the other side of the table or hold an objective, things like that. But that's what makes Warcry so fun. You pick an army you think is going to be absolutely brutal, and then you find out you've just got to get to the other side of the table. But, in my personal opinion, that's what Warcry is all about. It's just a bit of fun. It's not necessarily about winning any tournaments, anything like that, because you never know what the game is going to be. Okay, thank you for listening to my ramblings. Please hit that like button. And if you haven't done already, you know what to do. Please subscribe. Okay, guys, hobby safe.